Hey, it's Nathan. Before we start, let me ask you something. What would you do if the person you trusted most handed your child to a stranger in a motel parking lot and then texted you that everyone was safe at grandma's? Most of us think betrayal looks loud. A lipstick stain, a second phone, a hotel receipt. But the worst betrayals I've ever covered were quiet, patient, and dressed up as love. They had paperwork. They had coaches. They had a plan with your name written at the bottom of the page. The story you're about to hear is about a man named Sawyer Dunmore, who fixes broken things for a living. Carousels, music boxes, old machines that haven't sung in 50 years. He believed his marriage was one more thing he could keep in tune if he just paid attention. He was wrong about the marriage, but he was very, very right about one thing. Every machine, even a cruel one, has a mechanism. And if you understand the mechanism, you can take it apart. Stick with me to the end, because what looks like the worst night of his life is actually the first turn of a much bigger gear. This one taught me how some people weaponize the family courts, and how one quiet man refused to play the part they wrote for him. Let's get into it. Sawyer Dunmore had a particular kind of patience, the kind you only learn from spending years inside the bellies of broken machines. He was 38, lean, with the careful hands of a man who repaired things that other people had given up on. His shop sat at the edge of Belhaven, Michigan, a lakeside town that smelled like sawdust and cold water, and the sign above the door read, "Dunmore Mechanical Music and Restoration." Inside lived 100 unfinished miracles. A band organ with its pipes laid out like a skeleton. 3 carousel horses in various states of undress. Music boxes the size of a fingernail and the size of a refrigerator. Sawyer could listen to a machine for 10 seconds and tell you which tooth on which gear was about to fail. People said he had an ear. He said he just paid attention to what was already telling the truth. His real masterpiece wasn't in the shop. It was a 6-year-old boy named Finn, who had Sawyer's careful hands and his mother's wide gray eyes, and who believed with total conviction that his father could fix anything in the world. Finn liked to sit on the workbench while Sawyer worked, naming the horses, asking why the music sounded sad when you slowed it down. Because slow tells the truth, Sawyer told him once, not really thinking about it. He'd remember saying that later, on a night when everything slowed down at once. The marriage was the one machine Sawyer couldn't seem to tune. His wife, Celeste, had grown distant over the last year, in a way he couldn't name. Not cold, exactly. Renovated. She'd started attending a weekend program in the city called Threshold, run by a man named Quentin Falk. She came home from those weekends glowing and corrected, using words like authentic and self-betrayal and your unmet potential, words that landed on Sawyer like small accusations. She started saying he was emotionally unavailable, that she'd abandoned herself to be his wife. Sawyer, who had spent his life listening to machines, tried to listen to her too. He went to counseling. He cooked. He asked questions. He did not understand that the questions themselves were being collected, dated, and saved. What Sawyer didn't know was that Threshold was not a self-help seminar. It was a hunting ground. Quentin Falk had built a beautiful, profitable machine of his own, and Celeste was not its first satisfied customer. She was its newest blade. Quentin Falk understood people the way Sawyer understood gears. He was 50, silver at the temples, with a voice like warm oil, and a smile he could dim or brighten at will. Threshold looked, on the surface, like a personal growth program for women who felt unseen in their marriages. $4,900 for the weekend, nicer hotel ballrooms, soft lighting, softer music, a man on stage telling 100 tired wives that their exhaustion was not their fault, that they had been shrinking for years, that the bravest thing a woman could do was choose herself. That part was even true. Sometimes. Falk was good because the first layer of his lie was real, but underneath the inspiration ran a second machine, and it had nothing to do with healing. Falk's actual business was divorce. Specifically, expensive, scorched earth divorces that he steered, staged, and skimmed. He identified the women whose husbands had real money or real assets, and he coached them, privately, in what he called the exit. How to build a paper trail. How to reframe an ordinary marriage as quiet abuse. How to file first, freeze the accounts, and most valuable of all, how to win the children. because Falk had learned long ago that whoever controls the children controls the settlement. For all of it, he took a third of the house, a third of the savings, a third of whatever a frightened judge awarded a protective mother. He had a lawyer he fed clients to, a custody evaluator he kept on a leash, and a fixer who handled the parts that needed to disappear. Celeste hadn't gone to Threshold planning to destroy her family. That was the genius of it. Falk never recruited the cruel one. It was probably nothing. He told himself it was nothing for almost an hour. Then he opened the location app, just to see the little blue dot resting safely at his mother-in-law's house, just to feel foolish for worrying. The dot was not at his mother-in-law's house. The dot was downtown, motionless, in the parking lot of the Cardinal Court Motel. Sawyer drove. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't decide anything. His hands knew the way, the same way they knew a stripped screw. He parked across the street, behind a delivery van, and he watched the blue dot and the real motel line up into one terrible picture. Room 14. The door was open, throwing a wedge of yellow light onto the walkway, and there was Celeste, kneeling, zipping up Finn's little jacket the way she did when he was cold. And there was a man Sawyer had never seen. Tall, broad, leaning in the doorway with the easy posture of someone who had done this before, holding out his hand for the boy. Celeste stood. She put Finn's small hand in the stranger's large one, and then she turned and walked away from her son toward her car, not looking back, the way you walk away from a delivery you've completed. Sawyer's body made the decision before his mind did. He had the car door open, one foot on the pavement, 20 years of patience gone in a single white flash. He was going to cross that street and take his son and break whatever needed breaking. A hand closed around his forearm, hard. Not yet. A woman's voice, low, urgent, right at his ear. She had come out of the dark beside the van so quietly he hadn't heard her. She was maybe 40, dark hair, a face that had clearly not slept in a long time, and her grip was shockingly strong. You go in there now, and you do exactly what they need you to do. You become the angry husband who showed up out of nowhere. There's a camera in that room, Mr. Dunmore. There's always a camera. You need to see this first. Sawyer turned to look at her, half out of his mind. Who are you? My name is Juno. Yes. And she told him about her daughter Mabel, who would be 12 now, who had been 4 when Juno tried to leave Falk and discovered, too late, that he had spent a year quietly building the doll out of her own child. Juno had lost custody in a single afternoon to a video she didn't know existed. She had spent 6 years sober, working as a paralegal, gathering string. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me, she said. I'm telling you because Falk has a flaw, and you're going to need it. He can't resist a stage. Everything he does in front of an audience, because the applause is the part he actually loves. The seminars, the graduations. He records all of it, because he thinks he's the hero of it. She tapped the folder. Somewhere, there is a library of that man, explaining exactly what he is, in his own voice, to a room full of people who think he's a saint. Find it, and you don't need me to be believed. You let him confess for you. Across the street, the light in room 14 went off. Sawyer watched Mickey Sloat lead his son out to a second car, and he did not move, and it cost him something he would never fully get back. But he understood, now, what he was looking at. Not a betrayal, a device, and devices could be reverse-engineered. He drove Juno back to her car. Before she got out, he asked the question that had been building. Why me? Why now? You've watched this happen for years. Juno was quiet for a moment. Because of how you parked, she said. You didn't speed in. You lined up the angle. You cut the engine. You watched. Most men come in like a wrecking ball. You came in like a man reading a blueprint. She opened the door. Falk builds his machine out of people who react. I've been waiting 6 years for one who'd think. She paused. Don't let your son spend one more weekend in that room than he has to. But don't burn it down before it's wired to explode. Promise me. I fix things, Sawyer said. I don't burn them down. I take them apart so they can't hurt anyone again. Juno almost smiled. It was the first time, he'd guess, in a long while. Then he went home to an empty house that suddenly looked like a stage set, and he began, very quietly, to read the blueprint. The first rule of restoration is that you do not touch the broken thing until you have documented exactly how it broke. Sawyer applied that rule to his own life with a discipline that frightened him a little. When Celeste came home Sunday night, glowing, telling him about Grandma's garden and how much Finn had loved it, Sawyer smiled and asked how her mother's hip was doing. He kissed her cheek. He played the part of a man who had seen nothing, because the worst thing he could do now was let her know the machine had a witness. It was the hardest acting of his life, and he did it for 11 days. In those 11 days, he became a quiet archaeologist of his own marriage. He didn't snoop wildly. Finn's blue smartwatch had a feature Celeste had forgotten about, and Mickey Sloat had never thought to check, because who searches a child for a wire? It recorded voice memos, and it synced them to Sawyer's account, because Sawyer had set it up. The next weekend with Grandma was scheduled for that Saturday. The Friday night before, Sawyer sat on the edge of his son's bed and did the only morally complicated thing he allowed himself in the whole affair. He told Finn that the watch had a game in it, a secret one, where the watch was a little spy that liked to listen to grown-ups, and that if Finn just left it running and didn't tell anyone, even Mommy, even the tall man, they'd listen to the funny recordings together when he got home. Finn, delighted to share a secret with his dad, agreed. Sawyer hated using him. He told himself the alternative was worse, and he was right, and it still kept him up that night. On Sunday, Finn came home and they listened to the funny recordings together, and Sawyer kept his face perfectly calm, while his son giggled, and Mickey Sloat's warm, patient voice came out of the little blue watch, teaching a 6-year-old to say that Daddy grabbed him by the neck, rewarding him with a cookie and a sticker each time he got the script right, gently correcting him when he forgot. "Show me on the bear where Daddy hurt you. Good job. You're so brave. Let's do it one more time so you remember." Sawyer turned it off when Finn wandered away to play, walked into the garage, and was quietly, completely sick. Then he washed his face, came back inside, and made his son macaroni, because the boy was hungry, and because Slow tells the truth, and he was not going to let them rush him into a single mistake. He had the doll now. He had the proof that the doll was being built. But Juno had been right. A recording could be challenged, and a desperate mother claiming she'd been coached too was a sympathetic figure. He needed the man at the center. He needed Falk to confess in the one place Falk could not help confessing, on stage. Sawyer assembled his crew the way he'd assemble a restoration team for a job too big for one set of hands. He found a family lawyer named Lena Ibarra, 2 towns over, specifically because she had no connection to Falk's tame attorney and a reputation for being unbuyable. He laid the whole thing out for her, every photograph, every recording, in one long afternoon. Lena listened without interrupting, which he appreciated. And when he was done, she said, "If half of this is real, this man has been doing it for a decade, which means there are other parents. We don't just save your son, we build a pattern." Sawyer felt something settle into place, a gear finding its tooth. A pattern, yes. Juno brought the history, 6 years of paralegal work, of quietly pulling public divorce filings across 3 counties, of noticing the same evaluator, the same boilerplate emergency motion, the same suspiciously similar children's statements appearing in case after case. She had names. One of them was a man named Marshall Reedy, who had lost his auto body shop and most of his contact with his kids 3 years earlier in a divorce steered by Falk's lawyer, with a custody report signed by Dr. Odette Vey. Sawyer drove out to see him. Marshall Reedy was a hollowed-out man who at first didn't want to talk, and then, when Sawyer played him 30 seconds of Mickey Sloat's voice coaching Finn, put his head in his hands and wept, because his own daughter had once told a courtroom things he knew she'd been fed, and no one had believed him. "I thought I was crazy," Marshall said. "I thought I was the only one." He wasn't. There was Bridget Salko, whom Falk had stripped of a chain of laundromats and her self-respect. There were others, scattered across years, each one taught to believe they were the lone unlucky monster. Sawyer started connecting them, gently, one at a time. He wasn't building a mob, he was building a chord. Single notes are easy to dismiss. He needed one more thing, the inside of the machine, and it came from a place he didn't expect. Celeste's younger sister, Noah Quist, had been at the edges of all of this, uneasy, half pulled into threshold herself. Noah loved Finn, and when Sawyer, very carefully, let her overhear 1 minute of that watch recording, framed as if he'd stumbled on it by accident, something in her broke clean. Noah had been to the seminars. She knew the continuity portal, the members' site where Falk's graduates rewatched their sessions, and where, crucially, Falk kept his own recorded master classes for his inner circle, the ones where he stopped performing healing and explained the actual strategy. The coaching of children, the asset freezes. The third he took off the top. Noah had login access. She gave it to Sawyer not as revenge against her sister, but, she said, so Finn doesn't grow up thinking that room was normal. Sawyer Dunmore now had the whole mechanism laid out on his bench. The doll maker, the evaluator, the lawyer, the victims, and, sitting in the continuity archive, Quentin Falk explaining the entire racket in his own warm, terrible voice to a room of people clapping. He had the confession Juno promised existed. He did not run to the police, not yet, because Falk had police friends, and money, and a way of making accusations evaporate, and because Sawyer had learned the most important thing about the man from Juno's single sharpest observation. Falk could not resist a stage, so Sawyer decided to give him the biggest one of his life, and to make sure that when Falk stepped onto it, the whole town, and the right authorities, would be in the audience. The stage already existed. Sawyer had spent 2 years restoring the Bellhaven Heritage Carousel, the town's century-old pride, and the unveiling was scheduled for the Lakeside Founders Fair, 8 days away, the same week Celeste's calendar said filing. The whole town would come, the local press would come, and the restored band organ, the carousel's beating mechanical heart, was wired to a sound and projection system Sawyer had built with his own hands, because the town had wanted a show for the unveiling. Sawyer was going to give them a show. He went to see Falk once, alone, to set the hook, because a trap only closes if the animal walks in proud. He posed as the soon-to-be blindsided husband finally waking up, a man who'd heard about Threshold and wondered if it could fix him, who happened to mention he was the one restoring the famous carousel, that there'd be cameras, the mayor, real coverage. He watched Falk's eyes light at the word coverage. Sawyer, playing humble, wondered aloud whether a man like Mr. Falk, a true transformation expert, might say a few words at the unveiling, about renewal, about old things made new. Falk practically purchased the idea on the spot. Of course he would speak. He loved nothing more than a metaphor he could stand in front of. They shook hands. Sawyer drove home and quietly wired the last connection. Meanwhile, Lena Ibarra had been busy in the world of paper. She had filed nothing yet, deliberately, but she had prepared everything. A motion to preserve evidence, sworn statements from Marshall Reedy and Bridget Salko, a forensic report authenticating the smartwatch recordings, and a formal complaint to the state licensing board about Dr. Odette Vey, ready to send the instant the dam broke. Most importantly, she had quietly brought in someone who could not be bought or charmed, Detective Reuben Coe, a financial crimes investigator who had been trying to build a case against Falk's wellness finances for a year and had never been able to get a victim to stay on the record. Now he had a chorus of them, and a confession archive, and a date. The night before the fair, Sawyer sat with Finn on the workbench and let him pick which carousel horse would go on the outside row, the place of honor. Finn chose the gray one with the wild eyes. Because he looks like he's running away from something, Finn said, but he's really running toward the music. Sawyer had to turn his face for a second. Yeah, buddy, he said. Sometimes that's the same thing. The Lakeside Founders Fair opened under a clean blue sky, and half of Bellhaven came out to see the carousel sing for the first time in a generation. There was cotton candy and a ribbon and the mayor and, near the front, Celeste, who had no idea what day it actually was, holding Finn's hand and believing she was 3 days from rescuing him. Mickey Sloat was there, hanging back. Dr. Odette Vey had come because Falk asked her to support the brand. And Quentin Falk stood beaming in a pale linen suit, ready to speak about renewal, certain this was another room that loved him. Sawyer gave the welcome. He thanked the town. He talked, briefly, about what it means to restore something, how you have to find every hidden flaw before the music can be trusted, how a machine will lie to you for years if you let it, but it cannot lie once you make it play in front of everyone. A few people thought that was a strange thing to say about a carousel. Then he invited Mr. Quentin Falk up to say a few words about renewal, and the crowd applauded, and Falk took the stage like it was the only place on earth he'd ever been meant to stand. Falk was magnificent for about 90 seconds. He talked about shedding the old self. He talked about how the bravest among us choose themselves. He gestured at the gleaming carousel and said that we are all machines that have forgotten our own music, and that with the right guide, anyone can be made new. The crowd warmed. Celeste glowed. And then Sawyer, standing at the control panel he'd built, started the band organ. It did not play a waltz. The great brass pipes breathed, and the projection screens flanking the carousel, meant to show vintage photos, lit up instead with Quentin Falk's own face. His own voice, pulled from the continuity masterclasses, rolled out over the fairground in crisp, undeniable clarity, while the man himself stood frozen beneath it. The first one is always the children, the recorded Falk explained pleasantly to his invisible inner circle. Whoever holds the children holds the settlement. We don't ask them to lie. We rehearse them until the lie feels like a memory. The crowd's smile curdled. Then Mickey Sloat's voice, from a little blue watch, teaching a 6-year-old to point at his neck for a cookie. Then Falk again, breaking down his 30%, naming Dr. Vay's fee, laughing about a husband who'd kicked a door down and gift-wrapped the case. Then Marshall Reedy on screen, steady now, saying my daughter was coached and I lost 3 years. Then Bridget Salko. Then a document, blown up huge, the boilerplate emergency motion with its blanks, and the same children's statements appearing in case after case after case. Quentin Falk stood on the stage he could not resist, in front of the audience he loved, and the machine he'd built played his confession back to him at full volume, exactly the way Juno said it would. He lunged for the control panel. Detective Reuben Coe, who had been standing 6 feet away dressed like any other dad at a fair, put a hand on his shoulder and showed him a badge. Mickey Sloat tried to slip out through the cotton candy crowd and found 2 more of Coe's people already at the gate. Dr. Odette Vay was photographed by 3 reporters with her mouth open before she remembered to close it. And Celeste. Celeste stood in the middle of the fairground holding her son's hand, listening to the man she'd believed in explain, in his own warm voice, that her grief had been the raw material of a product, that she had been harvested, that the room she'd handed Finn to was an assembly line. Sawyer watched her face come apart, watched the program she'd been running collapse all at once, and he felt no triumph in it, only a tired, terrible gladness that it was finally being played in the open. She let go of Finn's hand. The boy ran, not toward his mother, not toward the chaos, but to the outer row of the carousel, to the gray horse with the wild eyes, and he climbed on, because the music had finally started, and a child knows where the music is. The unwinding took months, the way these things do. Quentin Falk was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and child endangerment across a stack of cases that grew every week as more parents came forward. Juno Maddox got the thing she'd waited 6 years for. With Falk's archive cracked open, the coached video that had cost her Mabel was finally exposed for what it was, and a judge who had once ruled against her on a manufactured lie reversed himself on the truth. Mabel was 12, wary, and would need her own years of slow repair. But she came home. The night the order came through, Juno called Sawyer and couldn't speak for a while, and he didn't make her. He just stayed on the line, the way she'd stayed beside a delivery van in the dark for a man she'd never met, and waited with her until she could. And the carousel ran. It ran every weekend through that summer and the next, the band organ singing its 100-year-old songs over a town that now told the story of the day the music played a man's confession instead of a waltz. Sawyer Dunmore went back to his shop, to the broken things other people had given up on, and he taught his son the first rule of restoration, the one that had saved them both. You do not panic at the noise. You find the broken tooth, and then, slowly, where everyone can see, you make it tell the truth. It's Nathan again. I've sat with a lot of these stories, and this one stays with me, because it's not really about a cheating spouse. It's about how the cruelest people don't break the rules. What got me about Sawyer wasn't that he was tough. It's that he refused to be predictable. He took the worst night of his life and made himself go slow, because he understood something most of us forget when we're in pain, that the people who hurt us are counting on our reaction, and the one thing they can't plan for is patience. He didn't get revenge by becoming as ruthless as Falk. He got it by being more honest, louder, and in public, by making a liar stand on the stage he loved and listen to himself. If there's something to carry out of this, maybe it's this. When someone hands you a script, the most powerful thing you can do is read it first. Look for the mechanism. Ask who benefits when you do the obvious thing. And if you ever find yourself across the street from something that breaks your heart, remember that the door will still be there in 5 minutes. And and a clear head is the only tool that fixes anything that matters. Thanks for staying to the end. Take care of the people who can't yet take care of themselves, and I'll see you in the next one.